This video will contain spoilers for the first 10 episodes of Dragons Rising Season 2. If you haven't seen these 10 episodes yet, be sure to go check them out because they're really good. One of the central plot points of Dragons Rising's second season is Lloyd struggling with recurring visions from the Source Dragons. Which, by the way, these visions are such a spectacular and flexible plot point. They're really good for kickstarting the plot and moving it forward in the earlier episodes of the season. And in the later episodes, they're used really effectively to tell a story about Lloyd trying to cope with his anxiety. Also, they're just such an easy way to foreshadow future plot points. Today, I want to go over every vision that Lloyd has from the Source Dragons in Season 2, Part 1 of Dragons Rising. Talk about what Lloyd sees in these, discuss the areas where they've already become true, discuss the areas where they've been averted or deviated from what Lloyd originally saw in some way, and some of the visions that could represent plot points in future episodes we haven't seen yet. There's a ton of really interesting stuff in these visions, so without further ado, let's get into it. The first vision we have here is the one in Season 2, Episode 1. And this is arguably the most important of all of the visions plot-wise. Because this vision is not only the one that basically kickstarts the entire plot of Season 2, it's also the one that even 10 episodes later still gives us the most information about Ninjago's future. So, the first thing we see here is just Lloyd being overpowered and haunted by wolf masks, whether it be a giant army of them or one great big one symbolizing the massive threat the wolf warriors pose to the world. After this, we get a pretty strange shot of ex-Empress Beatrix with what looks like a new design. I'm gonna say more on this later because we get a better look at this new design for Beatrix. But I just want to say the way they use aspect ratio in this shot is so cool with the black borders across the screen. I always love when Ninjago messes around with the aspect ratio like this, and I'll never say no to more of it. After this, we see Lloyd running in this giant streak of light before being crushed by the mallet to the Gong of Shattering. Now, it's pretty obvious as to why the mallet of Shattering is so prevalent in this particular vision. It's because at the end of this same episode, Cinder uncovers it and brings it to Lord Raz. But the light Lloyd walks on here is super interesting to me. As he gets further down the path, it gets darker and smaller before eventually completely extinguishing itself, leaving Lloyd completely in the dark. Now, whilst I truly have no idea what this is meant to represent, I do have a hunch, which I'm gonna discuss when we get to a bit later on in this particular vision. After this, we see a shot of Zane being overwhelmed by some wolf warriors, again tying back into how major of a threat these guys are. Now, here's the interesting part to me. This is a symbol of the Source Dragon of Motion. Directly after we see this symbol, the camera pans down to Sora, who is screaming in terror as she's crushed by a pile of rocks. This is really interesting to me because I'll just be straight up and say it, I think Raz's master is one of the Source Dragons. I thought this basically straight after finishing Season 1 Episode 20 back in October, but I especially think this now because this has gotta be a conduit vision, right? The way Raz gets lifted up into the sky before entering this ethereal plane where he's told things, basically beat for beat identical to the scene in Episode 3 where the Source Dragons communicate with Lloyd. Glowing eyes and everything. Now, me thinking that Raz's master is a Source Dragon is why, when I see the symbol of the Source Dragon of Motion, immediately followed by Sora being in grave danger, it definitely reflects kind of badly on the Source Dragon of Motion. And where I think the light path ties into this is that it looks incredibly similar to the beam the Source Dragon of Motion shoots into Lloyd in Episode 3. This beam is shot to give Lloyd a vision to go to Egalt, where this Motion Source Dragon explicitly states that they want to show Lloyd some of what he needs to do, but not all of it. Effectively shining a bit of light onto the subject, but then ultimately keeping him in the dark to the full picture. Now, honestly, regardless of whether the Source Dragon of Motion ends up turning out to be a big evil supervillain, I still kind of think that's what this light represents. If the Motion Source Dragon is evil though, Lloyd immediately being crushed by Lord Raz's mallet of Shattering straight after the Source Dragon's light extinguishes makes a lot of sense. Interestingly though, the motion symbol being there might not be a literal thing, but more of a symbolic thing. And I don't mean that to say that this vision is metaphorical more than it is prophetic, because obviously it's completely prophetic and literal. But I'm thinking the motion symbol being there might be foreshadowing how in the season, the ninja need to become one with the motion of the universe, in order to unlock Rising Dragon. Regardless of if the Motion Source Dragon specifically turns out to be Raz's master or some super key player in the future episodes, just the concept of motion is integral to the ninja's journey in these first 10 episodes of Season 2. This interpretation is definitely backed up by the fact that Lloyd again sees the symbol of motion, straight before himself unlocking Rising Dragon in the 10th episode of Season 2. After this, we get a better look at this new Beatrix design, which is mostly similar to her attire in Season 1, with a few things being changed. Her cape seems to be gone, and her armor here is a lot more lightweight. It's notably missing the shoulder pads, which creates a much more boxy look to it. And from this, I think Beatrix will definitely be returning in some way. Just on the sole basis that WorldBrain Studios would not make a whole new Beatrix outfit if their only plans for it were to just use it in this one vision and never have her appear again. Anyways, Beatrix pulls out this really weird looking sword and then smashes it on the ground. I assume breaking this sword will trigger some kind of huge event in the plot to happen, because otherwise why would you smash this thing into pieces? Perhaps there's some sort of angry and vengeful spirit dwelling within this blade, who knows? At the minute, this is just a very weird and intriguing part of the vision that I don't really know how to make sense of as of now. After this, we see Arin run up to the camera and throw a punch. A lot of people have evil Arin theories going into Season 2 Part 2, and I think I somewhat subscribe to these. Throughout these first 10 episodes, Arin just absolutely goes through it because of how inexperienced he is. Seemingly unable to make progress and accumulate more strength. I'm not sure he's gonna go full evil and join Raz, but I think he is definitely gonna get angrier and angrier as the season goes on. Maybe even making some kind of mistake or lapse in judgment, and taking some kind of evil shortcut to strength. Maybe he puts on a wolf mask or something. Super interesting. I'm excited to see what comes out of this. After this, Egalt shoots a blast of blue energy at Lloyd, and then the first vision ends. And we don't need to speculate on this because this one has already happened. In the ninja team's first encounter with Egalt, he shot blue blasts of energy at them. Next up, we have a few short 10-second long visions of Lloyd encountering wolf warriors. In one of them, we see the Gong of Shattering, which is pretty interesting. And then in the other, we see the wolf warriors powering up after the gong has been hit. Nothing too major in these two. After this, Lloyd receives a direct intervention from the Source Dragons, who give him some pointers as to what to do about these visions. The Source Dragons bicker amongst themselves for a minute, as the one Lloyd found under Imperium tries to convince Motion to help Lloyd. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying that Motion initially not wanting to help Lloyd adds to the theory that she's Raz's master. And while I would agree, and that honestly could be foreshadowing for that reveal, she relents and helps Lloyd so quickly, so I'm not entirely sure I can use that as evidence. Anyways, I don't think I need to explain this vision too much. Lloyd gets a vision of Egalt's dojo and Egalt himself, and then that manifests in the actual plotline of Ninjago as Lloyd goes to Egalt's dojo to train under his watch.
Not much room for misinterpretation there.
After this, our next major Lloyd vision comes in Season 2, Episode 7. Straight off the bat, the first thing this episode establishes that I really like is that the visions aren't the definitive future. Nothing Lloyd sees is absolutely set in stone. The visions Lloyd has after coming in contact with the Source Dragons show possible futures, which for me is the defining thing that sells the visions as an anxiety allegory. Nothing in these visions is absolutely set in stone and everything is subject to change, which I think is what this particular vision showcases the best. The first thing Lloyd sees here is just Cole, Zane, and Bonzel in the Sorceress's monastery. Nothing exactly too deep here, that's what's happening at this point in the plot anyways. Then we see some wolf warriors hunting in the wilderness. And after this, we see a great example of the idea that these visions aren't set in stone. Lord Raz has Bonzel set down on an altar ready to sacrifice her, which is kind of what happens in the show, but not fully. This possible future is changed as Cole, Zane, and the Sorceress put Bonzel in the magical sealing box, which is unfortunately then intercepted by Raz and taken to the altar anyways. So Bonzel still gets sacrificed to open up the gate to Neverspace, it's just that it now happened as she was trapped in the box. The possible future Lloyd saw here was changed as more elements were added to the equation. After this, we see Cole tell someone, but that will kill him, which will end up becoming true as the administration tries to take back Zane so he can be incinerated. After this, we see Kai and Sora fighting wolf warriors at the Shadow Dojo. And this vision is one that does mostly become true. Kai and Wildfire do fight wolf warriors at the Shadow Dojo, but 1, they're wearing wolf warrior disguises as opposed to their actual ninja suits. 2, they do so more in elemental mechs as opposed to on the ground with weapons. And 3, Wildfire is also a part of this fight. Then the portal revealing the Forbidden 5 opens, which does ultimately come to pass. I think this vision ties in really well with the idea of possible futures when you compare it to how the events actually play out. Some of it ends up actually playing out in reality, but not all of it does, and not in the way that Lloyd sees it happening. Our next vision after this honestly isn't too major. We see the Shadow Dojo, some wolf warriors hunting, Lord Raz hitting the Gong of Shattering, another look at the Forbidden 5 in Neverspace, and a more accurate how it actually plays out look at Lord Raz sacrificing Bonzel. Our next vision we get after this takes place in Episode 9, and this one is a bit more notable. The first thing we see is an absolute massive wolf warriors at the Shadow Dojo ritual, and then we see the Cloud Kingdom begin to crumble, which is foreshadowing when Raz attempts to have the Cloud Kingdom destroyed in the same episode. After this, we see the most notable part of the vision, Euphrasia being sacrificed to bring Nokt out from Neverspace, which partially does play out. Lord Raz does sacrifice someone to resurrect Nokt specifically, it's just the Master of Fire instead of the Master of Wind, oops. Anyways, this brings us to the final vision of the season in Episode 10, which starts abruptly when Lloyd is mid-fight. The first thing he sees is Kai lying unconscious in Neverspace after he was just sacrificed, and then he sees Cole attempting to fix the Cloud Kingdom's motor. This frame here is incredibly interesting to me. We see Rontu illuminated by the Blood Moon. Now what's interesting to me about this is that Rontu and Egalt turn into stone when the Blood Moon happens. Despite that fact, that curse they have placed on them doesn't seem to affect her at all here. Which leads me to wonder, is there going to be a second Blood Moon in this season? In the mid-season finale, the Blood Moon passes, and is supposed to be not coming back for another few millennia. Despite that, here we have a frame with Rontu next to the Blood Moon again. On top of that, there's a leaked Summer 2024 minifigure of Lord Raz clearly inflicted by the Blood Moon, just like he was in the actual season whilst it was still there. Could there be a second Blood Moon in Season 2 Part 2? It's pretty interesting to think about. After this, we see Lloyd begin to accept the presence of the visions in his life now as we see more of them. The first thing we see is Empress Beatrix punching him, who notably is in her Season 1 outfit as opposed to the outfit we saw in Lloyd's first vision in Episode 1. Notably, she also doesn't have that sword. I'm wondering what's caused the difference in outfits here. Perhaps something in the background we're not yet aware of has changed, and that possible future we saw in Episode 1 has now been averted? Who knows? After this, we get a pretty basic and straightforward shot of Nokt snapping Lloyd's sword in half. I think what this one represents is pretty clear. Nokt is very dangerous and poses a danger to Lloyd and the ninja. After this, before Lloyd unlocks Rising Dragon, we get a bunch of shots of the motion Source Dragon symbol, which I would delve into, but we already did that earlier, so I'm gonna save the time and not repeat myself. And yeah, that's a look at every single one of Lloyd's Source Dragon visions in Dragons Rising Season 2 so far. I think these are an incredibly interesting and cool plot device that build on the character of Lloyd and foreshadow new plot details really well. I think they're super interesting, and I hope you guys are now super interested in them after having seen this video if you weren't already. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through, everyone, and if you want to watch some more videos of mine, there'll be some end cards on screen now. As always, I hope to see you all in a future video. Goodbye for now.